So welcome everyone. I am so excited to have and see so many of you here today. Well, first let me introduce myself. My name is Valerie Grays and I'm the Student Life Advisor for the Office of Student Life and Engagement. And this is our last program of the month in celebration of Women's History Month. And what a wonderful day to celebrate and to have this exciting topic. And happy Maryland Day to everyone. If you didn't know, today is Maryland Day. So yay, happy Maryland Day that we're doing this on. This program is sponsored with the Office of Student Life and Engagement, our History Club, Anthropology and Sociology Club, and our Student Government Association. So we're excited to all be partnering together with, of course, the League of Women Voters of Baltimore City. As many of you know, during the non-pandemic times, we work with the League of Women Voters almost monthly, at least every other month, with them being on campus. And some of these ladies, I'm sure you have seen on the campus, because they will be there stopping you and asking you, are you registered to vote? Do you want to work the polls or something of that nature? And they have helped us to get voters registered at Baltimore City's Community College. So it's so good to see our ladies and our partners here, and our young men, because we have some men that work with them as well. So it's so good to see so many of them. And today we are excited to have two wonderful presenters today. We have Miss Roberta Sharper and we have Miss Sally Grant. So we are excited to have them. Miss Roberta Sharper is going to start the program off with us talking about the history of the League of Women Voters. Yes, I'm excited to hear what we have going on and what the history is like. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Miss Sharper. Miss Sharper is a native of Pennsylvania. However, she is a longtime resident of Baltimore, Maryland. She studied and received degrees from Coppin State and Morgan State, and studied at the University of Maryland, College Park. So she is a Maryland girl at heart, I see. Ms. Sharper is a retired educator. She served on study teams for the Lutheran World Relief, People to People Ambassadors, International Training and Communication, and for the Delaware Maryland Lutheran Synod. She has also been an observer to the United Nations March celebration of Women's Month, and she has held positions on the League of Women Voters. So without further ado, I am happy to present Miss Roberta Sharper.
Well, good morning or good afternoon. I'm not sure which at this point. Fellow Leaguers, students, and friends of the League and our virtual family who's watching us today. I'm pleased to be able to share with you material about the League of Women Voters as we near the end of this Women's History Month, 2021. A year ago this month, women across the country were planning the culminating events of several years of activities that would celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And Baltimore was no exception. Our Governor's Commission had spent 6 years preparing for what was to be a grand spectacular to showcase the struggles and the victories women had achieved to add a 19th Amendment to the Constitution to finally give women the right to vote. Much effort had been made to tell this untold story of the valiant women who struggled for over 80 years for equality. And we plan to leave no stone unturned to share that part of the history of this nation. How could we have dreamed in our most vivid imagination that the plan to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment would not take place at the Inner Harbor on March 7, 2020. This couldn't be happening. We had planned so well to join women across the country to tell this nation's not his story, but her story. And we were going to do it in a big way. For those of us who were witnesses to the events of 2020, There will be lifelong memories of protest, census taking, unusual political unrest, a worldwide pandemic, shutdowns, school closures, family separations, and deaths. I had been invited to speak at the United States Census Bureau on the day that the shutdown was announced. It seemed like the world as we knew it was collapsing all around us, like a canopy slowly enveloping the earth. What was it? This strange thing that brought the world to a standstill. A few people jogged their memories for something very similar that happened a long time ago, actually about 100 years ago. That something played a significant role in the history of women. In October 1918, Carrie Chapman Catt was sick, stricken with influenza, or what came to be known as the Spanish flu. This pandemic raged across the country, killing close to 200,000 people in October alone. But as sick as Carrie was, as president of the suffrage movement, her thoughts were about how this pandemic would affect the suffrage movement, because the 19th Amendment was at that time hanging by a thread in Congress, and she had drummed up immense momentum, only to see it quickly dissipate as the country shut down public gatherings and ordered people to stay home. She wrote letters to her suffrage workers across the nation. In her letters, she wrote, "These are sad times for the whole world. This sudden, sweeping influenza is bringing sorrow into many suffrage homes and presenting a new obstacle in the congressional and senatorial campaigns. The pandemic, along with World War I, would strangely enough end up helping the suffrage movement in a small way. Many women aligned themselves with President Woodrow Wilson, and tens of thousands of nurses served in the Army and Navy, while millions more volunteered for organizations like the Red Cross and organized fundraisers. They filled the labor gaps that soldiers left behind on the farms and in the factories. And they sold Liberty loans to fund the war effort. People soon realized how valuable women were to American society. Posters began to appear, showing women in their white uniforms, declaring that a nurse was the greatest mother in the world. Well, women hoped to use this service to demand the right to vote. The Spanish pandemic hit Washington so hard that Congress was closed to public viewing galleries. Hundreds of deaths were reported in the Capitol every week. Soon, most lawmakers were either out sick or tending to the sick. Political activities like rallies and speeches were suspended. At conventions, chairs were 4 feet apart, and the public was barred from attending. The pandemic was so bad that it was immoral for 6 women to meet in a room. So women were forced to abandon public gatherings. But women were not to be deterred and used the telephone, sent letters, took out ads in newspapers. The pandemic continued to rage, and there was a growing demand for nurses across the country to help fight the pandemic. The need was so great that the Red Cross reversed its previous hesitation to deploy Black nurses, and the pandemic peaked. So a number of Black nurses were sent to homes that had not before been open to them. So the pandemic became a really important moment, not only for gender, but also for race. America saw that women in general, but also women of color, were valuable. Carrie Chapman Catt survived the pandemic and continued her fight until the day the vote was passed. She had devoted half of her life to the cause, and 3 decades of constant work and travel. But she was already looking ahead to what should be the next chapter in the now changing role of women in this country. When she received the news of the passage of the amendment, she had this to say: "Our mothers began the struggle, and this victory is a sacred trust. For the uppermost feeling exists that though this victory has been won, women must not stop." She envisioned a new challenge. She felt that now that women had the vote, they must show men how they would use it, how to make the vote register for an improved citizenship. She had already lined women up under a new name, the League of Women Voters. What was to be the mission of this newly formed women-based organization? It would be a grassroots, nonpartisan, activist organization that believed voters should play a critical role in democracy. She wasted no time getting started. She founded the group in Chicago in 1920, only 6 months after the 19th Amendment was ratified. It began as an experiment designed to help 20 million women carry out their new responsibilities as voters. What would Carrie Chapman Catt think of her experiment 100 years later? Has the organization held true to the ideals upon which it was founded? Well, let us take a look at how the League has continued to carry out its vision. Between 1944 and 1945, 24 years after it was founded, at the request of President Roosevelt, the League carried out nationwide public support to assist in the establishment of the United Nations, to assure that the United States participated. And later, President Truman invited the League to serve as consultants to the United States delegation at the United Nations Charter Conference. In 1957, the League established the Education Fund, making the League an issue advocate because there was a need for voter registration and information. The League was established to encourage active and informed participation of all citizens, so there had to be an understanding of major public policy issues. The League voted to support the Equal Rights Amendment and followed up with a nationwide pressure campaign. The amendment was submitted to the states in 1972. An amendment must be ratified by 38 states in order for it to be passed and added to the Constitution. A time limit of 7 years was imposed. This past March, the state of Virginia finally ratified as the 38th state. If Congress does not accept Virginia's ratification because it was late, 7 years was imposed, it's possible that the Equal Rights Amendment will fail to pass again. In 1976, the League sponsored the first televised presidential debate since 1960 and received an Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Broadcast Journalism. The League sponsored the general election presidential debates in 1980 and 1984, and the primary forums in 1980, 1984, and 1988. The debates focused on nonpartisan issues because the main goal was to inform voters. Then the candidates began to demand increasing partisan conditions, and the League withdrew sponsorship of general election debates in 1988. However, leagues around the country continue to hold debates and forums for local and state offices. The League also provided a dedicated website for voter information as early as 1990. In 1993, The League's grassroots campaign for national legislation to reform voter registration resulted in the passage of the National Voter Registration Act, also known as the Motor Voter Bill. The goal was to increase accessibility to the electoral process and to enable citizens to register at motor vehicle agencies automatically, as well as by mail, and at agencies that service the public. New voters may register by mail or at any motor vehicle department or other government building. Today, early voting and absentee ballots are common. Fill out a form, request a ballot, and mail it in before the close of election day. The 2000 election exposed many problems facing the election system. So the League began to work on election reform by working closely with the Civil Rights Coalition. The League helped craft and pass the Help American Vote Act, which established provisional balloting requirements for updating voting systems and election assistance commissions. In 2002, programs were established to provide funds to states to replace punch card voting and lever voting machines. This brought reforms to the nation's voting process. In 2006, the League launched the next generation of online voter education, Vote 411, a one-stop for election-related information. Today, Vote 411 provides both general and some specific nonpartisan resources to the voting public, including a nationwide polling place locator, a ballot lookup tool, and candidates along with their positions on issues. In 2019, the League launched a people-powered fair map campaign. In June, the United States Supreme Court ruled that partisan gerrymandering could not be solved by federal courts. So the League initiated people-powered fair maps, a condensed effort across 50 states and the District of Columbia to create fair and transparent people-powered redistricting processes to eliminate a partisan and racial gerrymandering nationwide. How ironic that 100 years later, we are experiencing an episode so identical to the one Carrie Chapman Catt survived. And because of her indomitable spirit, we stand today on her slogan, "We must not stop." The Chicago experiment begun in 1920 continues across this country and in other parts of the world. I sensed the need as I met women in Africa, China, Australia, and at the United Nations. And let me not fail to mention in many parts of this country where women have yet to enjoy the full equality that the Constitution offers. This alone inspires the organization to meet the grassroots nonpartisan beliefs upon which the League was founded. To the students, this is your challenge to examine and re-examine the events of the past year. Educate your children so that they become citizen participants in the laws that govern our lives before it becomes necessary for citizens to storm the Capitol, for our legislators to go into hiding, for the National Guard and barbed wire fences to protect our politicians. As John Lewis said, we are better than this. And as we also celebrate the centennial of the founding of the League, let us look forward with pride to the next 100 years. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Sharper. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Whew, I learned so much. I didn't know that. Wow. Wow. Thank you. Well, we are going to move on to our second presenter, Miss Sally Grant. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Miss Grant. Sally T. Grant is a Baltimore native, educated in Baltimore City Public Schools. She is a proud graduate of Baltimore Junior College, which is now Baltimore City Community College. She went on to receive her Bachelor of Science degree from Towson State University, her graduate certificate in business management from Goucher College, and she even studied city planning and Shakespeare at Johns Hopkins University. Sally has worked as a teacher, stockbroker, and lobbyist for women and children's issues in Annapolis. Volunteering is Sally's passion, and she has held several executive and board positions in organizations such as the League of Women Voters, National Council of Jewish Women, Maryland Commission for Women, American Civil Liberties Union of Maryland, and the American Civil Liberties Union of the United States. I present to you Miss Sally T. Grant.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And it's great to be here. I appreciate all of this. And Roberta, wow, that was a wonderful presentation. I'm going to talk more about the nuts and bolts of how the league works, especially our local league, Baltimore City. It is kind of daunting when you think about an organization that finds itself as nonpartisan, grassroots, activists, and yet highly political. How do you meld these things together? And the answer is with difficulty. Right. So the first president of the League of Women Voters was a woman named Maud Wood Park, and she worked closely with Carrie Chapman Catt. And this was their vision. And I believe they had two priorities which worked in tandem. Because they believed that voting was not just a privilege, but a duty of every American. The first priority was to register as many women as possible to vote, this new responsibility that they had. The second was to identify and define the core issues of the day, and they would change over time, sometimes, not always. And in the 20s and 1920s, it was education, health, housing, redistricting, transportation, and fair elections. There were other issues that they were looking at, like having women serve on juries and have them appointed to boards and commissions, and all in the local area. The Baltimore City League of Women Voters was founded again in 1920, very quickly after the passage of the amendment and after the Chicago meeting. Madeline Ellicott was head of the suffrage movement in Maryland, and that transferred right over into the League of Women Voters. And she asked in Baltimore, another suffragette, Sadie Jacobs Crocken, to establish the Baltimore City League. And Sadie did. She became their first president and was spent 19 years in that office. Wow, long time, did good work. So to act on an issue, we have to have some basis for it. So the league would find a way to define it. Take the issue of education. They would look at it and say, what do we want in education? What do we want for our children? How should we finance it? How should the teachers be treated? What do we want to see? How do we want to see our children achieve? And those questions became part of what we call action, and I'm sorry. So we would study this and get experts in. We would actually have the meetings, and then we would bring our findings to a committee, and the committee would write up recommendations for the league, and the league would then vote on it. Once we have established those principles that we want, the league would then lobby for it in many ways. We hold public forums, and we still do. We hold the public forums, we talk to our legislators, we write articles, We do these kinds of education events until we can see some progress in what we do. And of course, we have made progress, as you heard from Roberta. Our fight has always been within the bounds of civility. That we feel that education to ourselves, educate our legislators, is the best way to make progress within our community. As we do our work, I think I would like to tell you a little bit more about the history of the League. In the early years of the League, our membership was pretty much white, well, it was white middle-class educated women interested in civic and civil liberties. After the landmark decision of 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, the League was active in recruiting members from all over Baltimore. Around 1970, men were admitted into our membership. So if there's any young men out there, you are welcome to come and join the League. In fact, we'd love to see you there. During the mid-60s, the League partnered with a community organizer, and I think many of you might recognize his name. It was Walter Carter. His daughter is Jill Carter, who is my state senator. It was in order to get every neighborhood voter registration into every single neighborhood. It was a great partnership, and the League became known in more neighborhoods than before, and we were able to bring in and work with all communities throughout the city. The history of the League continues, and our voter education activities to include candidate forums and voters guide. I don't know if you've ever seen our voters guide. Now it's online, and we have that 411 website that is up before all elections, that you can get information from all over the country about all the candidates. But that is one of our major things, is to make sure that all the citizens of Baltimore and the area have good, solid information about the candidate, their biography, and where they stand on the issues that are important to us. We try to arm the citizens with as much nonpartisan information as possible so they can make intelligent, educated choices when they go into the voting booth. So I think I'll stop here, except to say this, that in 1920, I mentioned what the issues were. In 2020, the issues are pretty much the same. We are still working on housing, redistricting, transportation, and voter access to the ballot. So I thank you, and I would very much like to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Sally. I really appreciate that. And thank you again, Roberta. We do have a question in the chat. One said, when did African-American women become full members in the Baltimore City League?
Maybe Lois Hibble knows, she's listening, than I do. It was around the 70s. It took a while. And I mean, once you became a member, and that was it. Though Irene Williams was president of the League maybe in the late 60s, early 70s. So we were one of the pathfinders on this issue, I think, from around the country. And especially in this area, it is still difficult for many people of color to find their way into the League of Women Voters in different communities in the state of Maryland. but not in Baltimore. And we're working on Baltimore County.
What are some of the recruitment efforts that the League of Women Voters do to get more young people interested in working?
Well, we do a lot of outreach, and Argentine Craig is on the website, and she goes over to the college and works there. We try and get into the schools and do some work there. Whenever we have a meeting, we don't do it now because we are not face to face. We have our literature there and sign up sheets, but everyone is welcome. And I would say we don't do as much as we should. We need greater outreach, especially to our young citizens, and especially the college students. They're our future.
Got a question. What can the League of Women Voters do to help pass federal legislation to protect our voter rights and to stop the states from passing legislation on voter suppression? What can we do to help? And either one of you ladies or both can answer that. Ms. Roberta, you're muted. There you go.
I would like to see more education of our political systems in our schools. Our young people are not being exposed to the things they need to know so that they can be educated participants. I remember years ago, we used to have physics in the classroom.
Right.
And students had an opportunity to learn something about how the system works and how they can benefit from it. And I think that we need to do this while in the last 6 years, because I was on the Governor's Commission for the celebration of the 19th Amendment, we were appalled at the little that we knew about this country and what things happen to women as they struggle to become equal. And just to think that many of the students had no idea of the struggles that were put forth for us to do this. So I think not being knowledgeable about what happens as far as laws pertain to the things that interest us, the grassroots, and being nonpartisan, as I said, you can agree to disagree. And the things that we saw this past year just makes it so evident that there's a lot of teaching that needs to go on in our schools to prepare people, our children, for what they need to do.
I'd like to, second what you said I'd like to second what you said about civics education in the school. I think a lot of people are talking about that. And also, this year's events show how fragile our democracy is. But back to the question, I think there's two parts. One is what we can do in the federal level, and the second is what we can do in the state level. In the federal level, we have a HR 1 that's now before. And what we have to do is get ourselves off our chairs, get on that telephone, get on there and send to every representative a letter, an email saying, this is what we want. This is how we're going to vote. And all of us have friends in other states. Have them do the same thing. Get it out, get the word out there. Now in the state legislature, here we are sitting here, and we're blessed in Maryland that there aren't too many pieces of legislation that we have to fight over voter access, because we have a good system, but our neighbors do not. We know what's going on in Georgia. We know what's going on in the Carolinas. Texas is a mess. And it can go on around the country. So we have to be watchdogs for our own state. And we have to encourage our friends, neighbors, relatives in other states to be vigilant and to take action. And I think that's probably the best way, because, the corporations can give you a lot of money, but they only have one vote. and this, you have one vote. So it equals out. And all politicians want to get elected. So they depend on the vote of the populace. And that's where we are. And that's how we have to use our muscle.
Great. You basically have answered this, but the next question that came in was, what is one thing that you would recommend everyone on this call do to help? And I guess you have just talked about that.
Well, I think we can double it up and do more.
Okay, have a question here. I very much appreciate your book ending the discussion with the influenza epidemic and the COVID-19 epidemic. In those early days of the suffrage movement, how were African-American women participants? And what was the stance, or perhaps African-American males at that time, with regards to African-American potentially gaining the vote? Wow.
Well, certainly African-American women were not included in what was happening at that time. There was a fear that because this struggle after the Civil War, that particularly in the South, that they didn't want Blacks to have too much power, so they didn't want women to do a lot. But World War I, as I mentioned early on, brought about the importance of women, Black or otherwise. Women were necessary. Black men such as Douglass, back in the Civil War period, led people to believe that Black people had a difficult time trying to become a part of what this country was all about. The Constitution was not written for Black people, and they had to find their way. Harriet Tubman and others who forged the way for us. Our young people need to understand how difficult it was for Black people to become a part of what was going on. Even in the pandemic, they didn't want Black nurses to go into homes to help people until it got so bad that they were glad to see anybody come in. So the Red Cross even had to reverse what it was doing. So Black people had double jeopardy. They were fighting for their rights as Black citizens, and they were also fighting for the rights of women and for the public in general. And we're seeing that some of that still hasn't changed, has it? We're still fighting this race thing that we somehow have to try and overcome using peaceful methods, as the League's Sally's pointed out, that we can agree to disagree, and we have to do something because we don't want another year of protest as we've had in the past year. This was just something that we'll be talking about it and writing about it for years to come. And we want to see that change. And hopefully the League and others who operate in these capacities will bring about that kind of change.
Right, can I add here? At first, the movement way back when Abigail Adams wrote to John and said, remember the women, they didn't even think about African Americans or any person of color. When in 1848, when the first beating of the suffragettes at in New York at Seneca Falls, Sojourner Truth, who had been this woman, ex-slave who had wandered around, traveled around the country talking about freedom, was not invited. She went anyway. I mean, what a woman. If, by the way, students, if you haven't read her speech on Ain't I a Woman Too, I recommend it highly. Read it, okay? The thing that blows my mind often is that the women back before and during the Civil War, the white women, they were all abolitionists, but it didn't transfer into rights and you know, for people of color. It just didn't transfer. It blows my mind to think of it. In 1920, Carrie Chapman Catt and her group made a decision not to include Black women because then they wouldn't get the white man's vote, and was only the white man who could vote. lessons of history. They also excluded other people like the prohibitionists because the liquor lobby was very strong. But they, that was a decision that they made that has taken years to overcome. But we are, and we have, and the time is now.
Next question. To support the Federal for the People Act, encourage your relatives in other states, especially in their senators, if their senators are opposed, to write their senators in support. And that's the legalwomenvoters.org or lwv.org for action alert. So that was from Ms. A public service announcement from Ms.
Good.
Lois Heifel. Thank you. Question. Does the League of Women Voters take a stance on gerrymandering and the solution?
Well, this new map that they want to put out, they hope will deal with that problem of gerrymandering, that it will be fair and transparent, that everybody will have an opportunity to look at this map and help to draw what needs to be, how you can show. But of course, the census is a great part of it, because they look at the census to see where people are, how many people are in different places. And but this fair map that they want to put out for all 50 states, the league is pushing that for all 50 states in the District of Columbia, that they will be able to use to seek to draft this map so that the people will have input into gerrymandering. So that there's no longer this partisan kind of problem that has always existed after the map is drawn, to know where people stand, what area you're going to live in, where your vote will be. So this is a good thing, and I hope it gets off the ground.
I agree. Gerrymandering, highly political issue, and we don't like to call it that. We like to say fair election practices, so that everyone and every vote will count, no matter where you are. Just like, yeah, Roberta, right.
Great, thank you.
Can I say
Yes.
one thing? This is
Yes,
a
you can.
history lesson. Iowa used to have, I don't know if they still do, but they have a commission that draws the lines for the political lines. And they have people of both parties, and you are not allowed to write to them or talk to them. They sit down and I'll try to do a fair job. I don't know if they still do, but what a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is interested in a few more words on the state of the ERA today. Can you speak more about the ERA?
Well, it takes 38 states to ratify whenever amendment is proposed. 38 states must ratify it, and then they give you a time limit to do it. Now, 1972, I think was the last time that the amendment was handed over to the states, and they were given 7 years to ratify it. They had 35 states. They lacked 3. I don't know all 3 of them, but Virginia was the last one. And just this past March, I understand that Virginia finally ratified it. But they're late. And so the question now is whether or not Congress will accept that late vote from Virginia. And so we don't know, because many things have come up that have caused the bill to fail. And if Congress does not allow Virginia's vote to count, it'll fail again. So that's something I guess we have to wait to see. Although the people in Virginia say they're going to push to make it Congress change that date and accept the vote from Virginia. So I think it's a wait and see.
Do you think it might have to end up at the Supreme Court?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it
seems that the matter is that being late may cause some problem there, because they didn't do it within the 7-year period.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So that remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a long time trying to get it passed, and the league has certainly done its part in trying to push it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the protests are effective after all these years?
It's
Yes.
hard to say.
What would be the next step to help younger adults and children to be more involved in it?
After watching what was happening with the protest this past year, you're in
Can you
quandary.
hear me?
It's really helped. You can look at it from two different standpoints. Every few years, something happens to make this thing break out again. And so you don't know where the next big outburst is going to happen. We're looking now at what's happening with Asians. Is this going to be a real problem again? Will we have protests for that because this has happened? We're looking at the gun control. I think you can just go so far with protests, and then people just have to sit down and decide among themselves or within groups how we're going to manage this in a dignified manner that will bring some peace to everybody. You can't please everybody, but we have to do something that's going to change the mindset of people when they want to go on these protests. And a lot of people lose interest after a while because does it really become effective after so long? Was there a shut-off period to when the effectiveness lasts? So there are different schools of thought on how protests, because people want to say that storming the Capitol was a protest. So it depends on the term, on who's deciding what to do, and whether you have people who are really interested in what's being protested. Are they there to cause problems and not try to solve problems? And so if the protest is going to solve a problem, that's wonderful. But if it's going to create acrimony among people, then I can't say how successful protests are.
Right. As someone who has gone to many and been part of many a protest, there is some effect on that by showing those in the power that there are many, many citizens who think in a specific way. Now, all the protests that I've ever been to, there is a piece of civility. There are barriers, you don't cross them. There are people, directing traffic, you don't attack them. There are barriers, and they're always observed, except this one time on January the 6th, everything went out the window. It was not a protest. It was an insurrection. And I think we have to define the difference. As I said, democracy is fragile. And it's the civics lessons in our schools would have taught people what we can do and what we can't do, and how to be effective within the process. So, Roberta, I'm a great proponent of protests. And but there's some wonderful pictures of the suffragettes wearing their banners in Washington being actually attacked by the police on horseback. All right. Woodrow Wilson forced women into prison because they were protesting in front of the White House. And but it changed minds, and so here we are today having this wonderful conversation.
100 years later.
Okay, I have another question. I'm sorry, my internet just kind of kicked me out for a second and I'm back now. Okay, I think I had one more question up here. Was there state-sanctioned violence against women during the suffrage movement? We have seen much of that recently toward peaceful Black protesters. How were women protesters met back then?
They struggled through some of them. We call them valiant because some of the struggles that these women endured are just, it couldn't happen today. I mean, being force fed, being thrown into jail, hung up by your wrist overnight, starvation, isolation. They're just horrible stories about how women were treated, all because they wanted to have equal access to the vote, just as the men did. I've spoken about this before, and I did it because of the history of the League. I didn't want to get into it again because the stories are so sad about what happened to women. Then there were splits between the different women's groups. Some of them felt that they should not support World War I because the war was not a good thing. It was going to interfere with the suffragette movement. And so there were splits. There always has been two sides to an issue. And many women were willing to suffer the consequences of their actions in order to get what they wanted to get. And they really suffered some terrible tragedies.
Yeah.
Police beating women up, being told at the Occoquan, there's an Occoquan workhouse in Virginia. Women were thrown in there for several months, and they tried to declare Alice Paul, I think it was, who as insane, lock her away so that her lawyers and other people couldn't find her. She lost, her weight went down to 60 pounds when they finally got her out of there. They're just sad, sad, sad stories about how women suffered in order for over 80 years to try and get the right to vote. And that is one of the things that women need to understand today, that you no longer have to suffer that. You may have some difficulties at the polls sometimes, identifying yourself and whatnot, but you don't have the struggle that these women went through in order to give us the right to vote. And we should never forget that.
Well put. We still objectify women. We still look at women of color in a lesser sense. We've got to get past this. And here we are in 2021.
Okay. I have another question. History shows, other nations have had women heads of state. Will the younger generation here in the USA see a female president in their lifetime? We've made progress, but how long before next steps can be made? That's a good one.
Who knows?
Who knows how long, right?
We're on the verge of it. We have a Black woman as a vice president of the United States. And that speaks volumes. You know, we thought when Obama became the first Black president that we had really overcome. And it seems to be go forward and then we go backward, and then we go forward and we go backward. But it seems like we're on the verge of something here now. So who knows?
And let me say, I can only hope that we will have a woman president shortly, right?
I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen.
You know, I don't know if I'll stick it, but I'm
for it.
Right.
Come, Sally.
Okay, let me see if we have any more questions in here and make sure I didn't miss any. Just have some statements. History shows me to not rely on Congress or any government agency and trust they have people of color and trust that they have people of color's best interests. So that was a statement.
Can I say something? Often who represents us is a reflection of us. And that's why we need to get to the polls, because if you cannot trust those people and they're making the laws that have to do with everything in your life, then something is really, you know, rotten in Denmark. We need to know who our representatives are and be able to communicate with them and be able to rely on on those representatives to making good decisions. So that kind of a statement really bothers me.
Well, a lot also depends on what the issues and what's happening in the world around us that can turn everything upside down. Biden has come into office. Now look at what's going on down at the border. Who would think that this now would interfere with many of the things he wants to do? So circumstances and problems can exist that sometimes make things go backward when they should be going forward. And we just need to sit at the tables in the United Nations and wherever and try to come to some kind of agreement. I know the United Nations is now not working the way it should, the way it was proposed to work, but we can't continue to have the kind of conflicts that continue to go on around the world, not only in our country, but because we are a leading part of the world. Much of it falls on the shoulders of this country. And we have to be able to sit down and negotiate with people. It's not always going to be easy, but young people who are coming along are going to have to bear the responsibility for decisions that are made. And they need to really be well educated and understand the issues and how we fit into the puzzle that is this world. Because we don't live in the world alone.
No, you're so right. It's a global economy. It should be more global in the way we govern ourselves, right?
Just a point of information. The League of Women Voters Maryland is a part of a coalition of is a part of a coalition that is working on police reform legislation, partly because protests did encourage action at the League of Women Voters level, or US level, as well as the state level. Members of the League of Women Voters, there is a free membership for students. Did you all know that? Students get free membership. And you can find someone in our group. And if you would like to know more, that means there are individuals on this panel. We have Ms. Lois Heigl that's on this panel as well. Heibel, I'm sorry. She is the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Maryland. Ms. Heibel, can you raise your hand so that they can see? There you go. And on the League for Baltimore City. So just wanted to let you ladies know and gentlemen know that if you want information, please put your information or your question to them, and I can get that question to them in the chat box. Do we have any other questions? Did I miss anyone? Question?
I've been listening quietly. It's been great. My students are here and I've heard them participate. So I'm very, very impressed by this presentation. It was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions that I missed? Okay. Well, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters of Baltimore City, our special presenters. Ms. Argentine, did you have a question or statement? Okay, Ms. Argentine Craig, my go-to lady. Ms. Argentine, you have something? You can unmute yourself. Okay.
In response to the question regarding how people can be involved with the work of the Baltimore City League of Women Voters, we have on also here today Dr. Billy Roberts, who chairs our membership committee. And if you are interested in becoming part of, and we really need young people, I mean, we really need young people to be involved in education and information and registration and spreading the word and getting involved as a good civic citizen. you need to contact Billy Roberts. Billy, raise your hand. Yep, there she is. And we will have free memberships for you as a student, and working towards information, communication, and education. Okay. Thank you.
Argentine.
Yeah.
Miss Argentine helped, definitely helped to put all of this together. She is definitely a wonderful partner, and I appreciate her so much. And in addition to all the other ladies, if you want that membership, I see some people have put in the chat box. If you're interested in the membership, if you can just put in there your name, send it to me or Renata, your name and your phone number and your email, and that way I can get this to the ladies, to Miss Billy, to get that information out to you. So just take a moment and do that and put it in the chat, and that would be great. Okay. Again, I want to say thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here and sharing and having us to celebrate our Women's History Month. I couldn't have thought of a better way to do this. This was wonderful and perfect on Maryland Day. It was just wonderful. Ms. Roberta Sharper, excellent. Thank you. Ms. Sally Grant, our alumna. Thank you. And all the ladies and all the students that came and asked questions and participated. Thank you so very, very much. Please make sure to look at our BCCC website and our Facebook and Twitter pages and get information on upcoming programs. And again, thank you so very much. We appreciate you all and have a wonderful, wonderful day.